There's a particular kind of person who, after a long week, doesn't reach for their phone to make plans. They close the door, sit in the quiet, and feel something that most people wouldn't expect. Relief. Not loneliness, not sadness, relief. And if you've ever been that person, you've probably spent some portion of your life wondering if something is slightly off about you, because the world tends to treat solitude as a symptom, a signal that something went wrong somewhere, that you're shy or cold or haven't yet found the right people. The assumption is almost universal. Humans are social creatures, and therefore the desire to be alone must be a deviation from the norm. But that assumption is worth examining more carefully, because what's actually happening in the minds of people who prefer solitude is considerably more interesting than the story most of us have been told. Start with what we know about the brain's reward system. When most people engage in social interaction, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reinforcement. For a large portion of the population, socializing is genuinely rewarding at a neurological level. The brain registers it the way it might register food or warmth. It feels good, so it seeks more of it. But research into introversion and what's sometimes called social reward sensitivity has found something telling. People who habitually prefer solitude don't necessarily have a broken reward system. What differs is the threshold. A 2012 study examining dopamine pathways found that individuals who scored high on introversion measures tended to show lower reactivity to social reward stimuli. Not an absence of response, but a quieter one. The same social event that produces a strong dopamine signal in one person might produce a much more muted one in another. This isn't a flaw in the wiring, it's a variation. And when you understand that, the behavior starts to make a different kind of sense. If socializing produces a moderate reward but also demands a significant amount of cognitive and emotional processing, the calculus changes. The brain is always, at some level, weighing cost against return. For people whose social reward sensitivity is lower, the return simply doesn't always justify the expenditure. So the brain steers towards something else, towards stillness, toward internal activity, towards solitude, not out of avoidance, but out of efficiency. This connects to another piece of the puzzle, the default mode network. This is a set of brain regions that becomes most active not when you're focused on the external world, but when you're turned inward. Mind-wandering, self-reflection, imagining futures, processing complex emotions, these are all functions of the default mode network. And studies using neuroimaging have consistently found that people who prefer solitude tend to show heightened activity in this network. Their brains, when given the chance, default to inward exploration rather than outward engagement. The quiet isn't emptiness for them, it's occupation. This doesn't mean they're more intelligent or more emotionally sophisticated or somehow superior in their inner lives. That framing misses the point entirely. It simply suggests that the brain of someone who prefers solitude is, in a very literal sense, doing more with less external stimulation. The internal environment is sufficiently rich that external input isn't always necessary to sustain engagement. Now here's where it gets more nuanced, because solitude preference isn't a fixed trait that exists in isolation. It interacts with personality, with life history, with nervous system sensitivity. There's a meaningful overlap between people who prefer solitude and what researchers call high sensory processing sensitivity, a trait found in roughly 15 to 20% of the population, and, notably, in a wide range of other species as well. People with this trait process sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. They notice more. They feel the texture of an environment more acutely. And because of that, social situations, which are dense with stimuli, unpredictability, and emotional input, can become cognitively overwhelming faster than they do for others. If you've ever walked into a loud, crowded room and felt not excitement, but an immediate, almost physical need to find a quiet corner, that's the nervous system registering overload. It isn't antisocial. It's actually the product of a brain that's processing everything it encounters at a higher resolution. And this is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes something that many people who prefer solitude have quietly struggled with. The experience they've been told is a limitation, the sensitivity, the need for quiet,
The preference for depth over breadth and social connection is actually the surface expression of a brain that is working harder and processing more carefully. It isn't withdrawal, it's self-regulation. There's also something worth saying about what solitude actually does for these individuals, because this isn't just about what they're avoiding, it's about what they're gaining. Solitude, for people who are wired this way, functions as something closer to active restoration. A 2017 study on adolescent solitude found that voluntary aloneness was associated with increased positive affect and reduced stress, but only when the solitude was genuinely chosen rather than imposed by circumstance. The distinction matters. Loneliness and solitude aren't the same thing. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. Solitude is the choice to be alone, and for the right brain, it's a form of recovery that socializing simply cannot provide. This is where the deeper psychological question emerges. What does it mean to need something different in order to feel whole? Because society has a strong, largely unexamined assumption that the social path is the healthy path, that connection, stimulation, and external engagement are what fill a person up. And for a significant portion of people, that's accurate. But for another portion, it isn't. And the problem isn't the people, it's the assumption. The people who prefer solitude aren't failing to connect. Many of them connect with tremendous depth and care, with individuals rather than groups, with ideas rather than small talk, with meaning rather than noise. What they're declining isn't intimacy, it's performance. The kind of social interaction that requires you to project a version of yourself outward without ever going inward. That particular transaction, for this particular kind of mind, feels like spending more than you're earning. What's also interesting is how modern life interacts with this. We live in an era that has structurally amplified social demand. Notifications, open offices, social media metrics, the expectation of constant availability, all of it pushes in the direction of outward engagement. The cultural message is persistent. If you're not connecting, you're missing out. And for someone whose brain genuinely needs periods of quiet and internal processing in order to function well, that message doesn't just feel irrelevant, it feels slightly destabilizing, like being told that breathing slowly is inefficient. There's a quiet irony here. The traits that make solitude-preferring people seem less socially engaged, the depth of processing, the internal richness, the careful observation, are often what make them unusually perceptive about other people when they do engage. They've spent a great deal of time inside their own heads, which tends to produce a fairly detailed map of human interiority. They notice things, they listen differently, they ask questions that go somewhere. The very thing the world sometimes reads as distance is often what generates their most meaningful capacity for closeness. None of this means that preferring solitude is without its complications. It can produce a particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of feeling misread, of having your quietness mistaken for coldness, of watching a world that seems designed for people whose wiring is different from yours. That experience is real, and it matters. But it doesn't mean something is wrong, it means something is specific. The psychology of people who prefer solitude isn't the psychology of people who have given up on the world. It's the psychology of people who have a different relationship with it, one that runs deeper, slower, and quieter than the dominant model tends to allow for. Their need for aloneness isn't an absence, it's a language. And once you understand the grammar of it, the behavior stops looking like withdrawal and starts looking like exactly what it is, a mind taking care of itself in the only way that actually works for it. If this resonated with you, you'll probably connect with our video on why highly observant people often struggle to explain themselves. It explores a similar kind of inner life from a different angle.